Thanks, David, for introducing. As you know, not all operators will have access to evidence-based training as presented by David earlier on. So we also had to make a review of the requirements in the rules. Most of them, flight crew training requirements, are part of the ORO-FC regulations, but then we also had to address the air crew training requirements. And the one topic that we really wanted to address, first and foremost, was the multi-pilot operations of single-pilot certified helicopters on a voluntary basis, because this doesn't happen much in Europe at the moment. Why not, by the way? Well, simply because we don't have too many ATPL licensed pilots outside the offshore environment. What's getting in the way? First, the ATPL theory. Not many of the pilots in the onshore world hold this certificate. We already had this problem before. The JAA had a solution. They had the ATPL-H VFR in order to simplify the access to the theoretical knowledge of the ATPL. Actually, it didn't work. People didn't go for it because it didn't grant many privileges at all. So most of you, most of the helicopter community is stuck with a CPL that then doesn't grant the privilege to fly commercial air transport with a co-pilot. Does it make sense for an experienced CPL to get an ATPL theory, even an ATPL VFR? Well, if he learns something from it, if it's useful for the rest of his career, yes. But by the look of the learning objectives in there, probably not. So we have to fix it. Another prerequisite that gets in the way of more ATPL licensed pilots is the experience in multi-pilot operations. In order to get this experience today, you have to fly as a co-pilot of a licensed ATPL commander. You would find such a person in the offshore world, and you're likely to stay offshore once you've got the experience. So it doesn't work. Another big problem that we had with multi-pilot operations is that our rules are complex, our definitions are complex, and the member states don't grant the same privileges to multi-pilot operations to the same pilots. Have any of you been involved in authority shopping on this? So let's go back to the basics. What do we need an ATPL license for? What do you want it for? We want it for operating large helicopters under CAT IFR, and what I mean by large is 10 passengers or more. That's how it is today, and that's what we want to keep. When it comes to the ATPL theory, we're happy to have pilots have the ATPL theory when flying large helicopters under CAT IFR as well. We don't think it's necessary for VFR flight for NCC or SPO, so long as the machine is single pilot certified. So what was the ATPL VFR for? It's still a good idea to get a modular access to the full ATPL, but no more. What do we want MCC training for? Well, we would like it to be required always as soon as you fly in a multi-pilot environment. And then, if this is the case, if everybody has MCC training, then why shouldn't we credit multi-pilot experience towards the ATPL prerequisites? Well, we would need both pilots to be MCC trained, but also multi-pilot SOPs to be implemented, and recurrence checks to be taken into a multi-pilot environment as well. If all this is in place, and this is what we intend to put in place, then regardless of the kind of operations, the experience should be credited. How do we achieve this? Well, it's as simple as changing two definitions in the aircrew regulations. The definition of the single-pilot helicopter and the multi-pilot helicopter. Instead of a single-pilot helicopter becoming multi-pilot as soon as you say you're having a second pilot and you're writing this in your ops manual, well, the single-pilot helicopter becomes a multi-pilot helicopter only if two pilots are required by the flight manual or required by the Air Ops regulations, and that would be only for CAT. As a bonus, most of the helicopters will remain single-pilot helicopters while operated multi-pilot, and that means you wouldn't have the SP-MP variants on your license on most of the helicopters. So that's how we solve the multi-pilot environment problem. Now let's go to the CAT Helicopter Operator Proficiency Check, the famous OPC. Where do we start from? A long list of mandatory drills that you will rehearse again and again every 6 months. We keep this long list of items for the initial OPC only. And when it comes to the recurrent OPCs, we introduce 6-month cycles, 12-month cycles, 3-year cycles, depending on the criticality of training and the kind of failure that we want to train and check. It does sound similar to evidence-based training, doesn't it? Guess where we got the idea from? The 6-month cycle is mainly for single-engine helicopters. Here we keep a short list of mandatory items to be practiced every 6 months. The 12-month cycle is basically the license prof check that you have to do every year, and all the mandatory items that are in there. It works well with the twins, but not so with the singles, because if you have single-engine helicopters, then you can do the license prof check on one type on year 1, on a second type on year 2, and on the third type on year 3. So that's why we have the 6-month cycle as well. Everything else, all the other major failures, you can train on a 3-year cycle. It takes a bit of time out of checking and into the training. The OPC checker will have to be an instructor in the future. Amazingly, this is not yet the case. Operations on several helicopter types or variant is mainly for CAT, and we've already started talking about it. And I have it all in one slide. Unfortunately, it's a complex one. First, the line check. We introduced the option to do 1 line check per year instead of 1 line check per type or variant. But that's only if operations are sufficiently similar. If the operations are very different, either because the avionics suit is different, or because you're flying VFR on the single and IFR on the twin, or because you have singles and twins simply with different SOPs, then you do 1 line check per variant, of course. For the CAT OPC, I've explained before, you can do 1 license prof check on 1 single engine type, and it's going to be valid for the other single engine types. Well, if you can do it for FCL for the license prof check, in the future you will be able to do it for the OPC as well. And for any other credit, when flying different types or variants, you would need to have OSD data to justify. Otherwise, you do the whole list of training and checkings on all types and variants. There was one big controversy to the current rules, and that is how many types and variants can a pilot fly. And this number, as soon as you fly CAT, is limited to 3 in our current rules. Of course, if you don't fly CAT, the line at the top of the table is already there. You don't fly CAT, you don't have restrictions. And if you fly heavy helicopters with a mass above 5.7 tons, you're restricted to 2. These lines don't change. What changes is, today, if you fly CAT, then you have to count the number of types that you're flying on all kinds of operations, including NCC, Sport, and NCO, and you're restricted to 3. That's the way it's written in the rules today, and it was probably not foreseen that NCC, SPO, and NCO would get in the way. So we had to change this. If you fly only 1 type in CAT, then you'll get more training on this type, and you probably don't need restrictions on NCC and SPO and NCO. You probably don't need restrictions on NCO at all, because I'm happy that you fly freely in the air club or in the heli club, and that doesn't impact your professional life. And then when it comes to the previous restriction to 3 types, we move the bar up to 5. If all helicopters are less than 5.7 tons, day VFR only, no more than 1 multi-engine type, so that we remain simple kind of operations, no variance within each type. So it's a bit more complex than before, but it adds more options to what you can do. Next topic is NCC. This is it. The yacht is for sale, by the way. How do you regulate NCC with only 2 or 3 lines in the regulation? Well, it's perfectly fine if the 2 or 3 lines are right, and they're actually not bad. So what we needed for NCC was only adding a few AMCs and GMs to the rules. One of them was about adding either training to proficiency or operator proficiency checks to the initial conversion course or commander's course for NCC. Why did we do that? Because the basic regulation says so. We also introduced a 3-year cycle for the training. But the great big step that we're introducing for NCC is a policy for acceptance of previous training. Well, this makes sense if your NCC pilot is also a CAT pilot and is getting all the very good training and checking from the CAT operator. And the helicopter is the same, for example. It also makes sense if you have 2 or 3 NCC operators with the same helicopters, equipped the same way, and they pool resources to develop SOPs together, and they have the same SOPs and checklists and aircraft types and equipment, and they develop the training and checking programs together. Then why duplicate? Why do training and checking at each NCC operator? So that's the idea. If you meet all the conditions and you can document and record the fact that you meet these conditions, then it's your responsibility as an operator, but you can accept training done somewhere else. And that's new. SPO, how can you regulate so many different kinds of activities in only 2 or 3 lines in the regulation? Well, it's pretty okay if those 2 or 3 lines are good, but this time, as opposed to NCC, they were not. So we had to introduce a number of things, starting with initial sport training and checking. Believe me or not, read the rules if you don't trust me. There's nothing much in there. Although, if you want to learn a new specialized operations, it's likely that you need in-depth training, so we introduced that. This would usually include flight training. Of course, we have experienced people in the room who will say, if I have a lot of experience on a given SPO, and I want to train on a very similar specialized operation to what I already know, then I don't need training. Very good. If you want to skip the flight training part and you fail the OPC, then you're back to square one. When changing operators, we also require training, not specifying flight or ground, and the OPC that is going to take place in flight. So more requirements on the initial training and checking part, fewer requirements on the recurrent training and checking part. Well, fewer requirements for checking. Read the rules if you may. Today, we require 1 OPC per variant per specialized operations. That is a lot of checks per year per pilot. What we want to achieve is 1 OPC per year and do a 3-year cycle for the training. Is that too good to be true? Well, probably. In order to achieve 1 OPC per year, we need to split it in 2 halves or 2 parts. The type-related part that can actually be combined with a license prof check. So if you fly several types, you will have several license prof checks. And then the spore-specific part, and then we really want to have this one once a year. How can you do this if you fly very many different kinds of specialized operations? You do a 3-year cycle. And it's up to the operator to define what is going to be included in the spore-specific part of the OPC and how they will define their 3-year cycle. And it will depend on the kind of activities that they're doing, and they can take the opportunity of this 3-year cycle to rebalance the training. If they do a lot of one particular specialized operations and a small amount, maybe 10% of another, they would like to rebalance this and do a bit more training and checking on the one that they do the least and a bit less on the one that they do the most. Even though it's complex, they feel that they're on top of their art on this one, then it's up to them. One more thing, an experienced captain who's experienced in the specialized operations will be able to conduct the SPO part of the OPC. And additionally, that's probably inspired by EBT as well, we introduce an option to do a bit more training and a bit less checking, because we have a 3-year cycle for training, 3-year cycle for checking. Operators can just move things around between the two. Now, the NPA will be published very soon. I was hoping this month, but it's likely that we'll make it only early January. It will be open for comments. There will be a few questions for you to answer in there. And of course, if you have immediate feedback and questions to me, I'm ready to answer. Thanks a lot.